Hello, I'm Gretchen Sable, and I'm president of LWV ABC. We up here in Anoka County are very fortunate to be recognized by for our work by League of Women Voters of U.S. We have been nominated, one of the 3 finalists for the Powering Democracy Award. The winner will be determined by voting, so I'm going to urge people to vote, and the link is on our website. So you just type in LWVABC Minnesota in your browser and it will come to our website. The Powering Democracy Awards will be presented at the League Convention in recognition of leagues for their work exemplary over the past biennium. This awards theme was inspired by the LWVUS Women Power Democracy campaign. Finalists support the Women Power Democracy goals and/or the goals of the Campaign for Making Democracy Work. And so I want to thank Pat Kennedy for making our submission. Submissions reflect that LWV is an organization fully committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in principle and in practice. So there's a bunch of different categories. I want you to go find the link and read all the categories and vote your heart. And you can actually vote more than once, but you didn't hear that here. And I will turn it over to Deanne. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, does everybody remember the song, We Shall Overcome? And we shall overcome here. I would like to thank Brooklyn Park, Osseo, and Maple Grove League of Women Voters for co-sponsoring this program. As always, those members on the Zoom meeting, please put your questions and responses in the chat, and the members attending in person, please put your questions on the index cards we have passed out. I think I forgot to pass them out.
I'll take care of that.
We are here to hear from Alisa Reckinger, Communication and Outreach Specialist with Hennepin County's Environment and Energy Department, and Emily Johnson, Environmental Educator from Hennepin County, again in the Environment and Energy Department. They will speak to the issue of connecting climate and the community. Alisa and Emily, you're on.
All right, hello everyone. I'm just gonna get my screen shared up here. All right, so can you all see that? And then I'm gonna change my view back. Let's see if I can get the chat. Okay, Emily, I'm not currently seeing the chat, so if there are questions in the chat, just I'll stop at kind of at the different sections and you can let me know. So
I'll take care of it for you.
Thank you. I'm not used to, like, I haven't been on Zoom a lot and shared my screen, weirdly enough. We use Teams at the county, so but perfect. So yeah, I'm gonna walk through a presentation I called Connecting Climate and the Community, but let me tell you a little bit about myself first. So like Deanne said, I'm an environmental communications and outreach specialist with Hennepin County. So mostly that means supporting the various environmental programs that we have and helping them get the word out about the services and the programs that we offer. Sometimes, like in this case, I get to do a biking photo shoot for work. So that was a really highlight day for me. So Hennepin County last year had our first climate action plan adopted. My role in the plan was, I was the editor of the plan. We also developed a website that I'll show you at the end, and I developed the content strategy for that website. I also conducted research into the public's relationship to climate issues. So a lot of what I'm presenting today is kind of based on that project. And my whole idea behind that project was there's been a lot of research done about climate change and the public's relationship to that. And let's get up to speed on that so that the county is really well suited to be doing community engagement and education and communication around climate moving forward. And now we have the website, we have a newsletter, we have some other communication tools, and I'm the lead on coordinating that. But really it's a cross county lead, and Wes and I were talking about how the county has a lot of different roles, and being on the climate communication has allowed me to really get some good connections in with other people, because climate really is a cross-cutting issue. It's not just environment, and we're trying to make sure that's the case with the county. So what I'm going to go over today is what climate change means for Hennepin County. I'm just going to spend a brief second there. So we're not going to dig too much into the science of climate change, but we'll just go over that really briefly. I will spend also just a brief moment on the county's climate action plan and vision for a climate-friendly future. But really, I'm going to spend the most of the time talking about what we know about the public attitudes about climate change, how to understand your audience and different audience segments that there are related to climate change, the public's barriers and motivations when it comes to taking action on climate change, and then behaviors we really want to focus on. And I think this will be very relevant to the work a lot of you do. We'll also talk about messaging that relevance and how to really talk to people about these issues and really relate to them. And we'll wrap up with figuring out where to focus your climate action, and hopefully we'll have time for a little bit of discussion around that. So, and like I said, I did figure out where the chat is. So I'll have time to take questions at the end, but if there's questions that come up during the presentation, there'll be some natural breaks. So feel free to ask those as we go along. All right, so what does climate change look like in Hennepin County? Climate change looks a little different than what you might think of. So you might think that climate change is impacting wildlife far away. Obviously, we don't have any polar bears floating on icebergs in Minnesota. We also see a lot of images of, these big scary wildfires in California and on the West Coast. And that's not exactly what climate change looks like here, although we did have, the wildfires last summer closer to home. So maybe in the future it might. But climate change is already impacting us here in Minnesota. This is a picture of a resident in Minneapolis that's dealing with flooding in their home. And this is actually in the winter. So they're dealing with a winter freeze thaw, kind of rainy snow, flood situation. So like, what a mess, right? There's really two major climate trends impacting Hennepin County. Number one, Hennepin County is getting wetter. That looks like more intense, damaging rainfall and more flash flooding. So maybe that's something you've noticed in your own life and experience. And we do still have natural cycles. We had a really dry summer last year, but overall Hennepin County is definitely getting wetter. Hennepin County is getting warmer, but there's some nuance to that. Most of the warming we're seeing is actually happening when it's coldest. So that means icier winter conditions. So maybe you've noticed that. I certainly have. I really enjoy cross-country skiing in the winter, and it's getting a little harder every year to find some good snow conditions. And also warmer winter nighttime lows, which might not inherently sound like a bad thing, but that has a big impact on our ecosystems and what can survive or not survive here. Cold winters are a good thing for us for keeping a lot of pests at bay. One thing we're not quite seeing yet is warmer summer temperatures. We had a presentation from the state's climatologist, and I really enjoyed how he said, Minnesotans are really heat sensitive. So coming up tomorrow is going to be probably a miserable day for a lot of us. And we might say like, oh, that's climate change. But the reality is, at least currently, that's just natural variations. We just really dislike heat. But these are things we are expecting to see over the next few decades. So definitely something to kind of keep an eye on. We also, in our engagement for the climate action plan, asked residents what they're experiencing, what impacts they felt like they've experienced from climate change. So maybe some of y'all can relate to this. Residents told us they're feeling stress or anxiety due to worrying about climate change. And hopefully some of the tips in this presentation will take us, worrying is an effective emotion for climate change, but moving into how do we be effective at engaging people, moving them beyond worry and feeling positive about solutions. They've also had changes in activities due to extreme, severe, weird weather. Feel like they've seen an increase in pests, like our favorite mosquitoes are real bad this year, and ticks. Needing to deal with extreme heat or cold, and then impacts on activity due to poor air quality, which we had quite a bit of last summer due to wildfires near and far. So really quickly, the county's climate action plan, and I see that Emily put a link to our website where you can find out a lot more about it there. But it really looks at cutting greenhouse gas emissions to prevent the problem from getting worse, adapting to climate hazards so we can be prepared for impacts. And then we have a real strong focus on equity, creating equitable, resilient, and stronger communities. So we really tried to center people in our plan development. We also articulated our vision for a climate-friendly future, and hopefully later in the presentation, you'll see why this is important. But really, we envision by taking the strategy, by enacting the strategies in the Climate Action Plan, we'll have healthier communities, sustainable buildings and transportation that efficiently use clean energy and are accessible, and a lot of options for people to get around. We're taking care of our lakes, rivers, and streams and the natural resources that really make Hennepin County a great place to live and that we all kind of commonly value. We're also looking at implementing green infrastructure and promoting economic opportunities and green jobs. We want to make sure we're continuing to engage our communities. It's going to make our strategies more effective and more creative. And then we're really looking to reduce disparities and increase equity. All right. So that's kind of the background. Now to dig into some of the research that I did about what the public thinks about climate change. So first of all, the public's attitudes about climate change. Overall, people are concerned and engaged. I think it's really important to ground us there. People increasingly say that climate change will impact them or their communities, depending on where you live. And geographically, the Midwest seems to have more distance from feeling this than, you know, on the coast where they're really feeling hurricanes and wildfires. But people do increasingly say climate change will impact them or their communities. And people are increasingly more worried about climate change, more engaged in the issue, and more supportive of climate solutions. But a really important point here is that we underestimate how much others agree. So we might be personally worried, we might be personally concerned. We don't think our neighbors, our family and friends are all that concerned. And we'll see later, but this really kind of leads us to not talk about it much. So it's important to kind of ground it in, people might agree with you more than you think. The Yale Center for Climate Communication, maybe you've heard of it. They've done a lot of great research, public opinion research on climate change. And they have these great maps where you can drill down really locally down to the county level. So we took a look at, you know, what's happening here in Hennepin County. And basically Hennepin County, you can take what the public thinks in the US and Minnesota and kind of notch it up a level. So Hennepin County residents believe more strongly than Minnesota and the US overall that climate change is happening and it's caused by human activities. But there's still a gap in knowledge about the causes of global warming and how much the scientific community agrees that it's happening. So the scientific consensus being that 97% of climate change or climate scientists think that climate change is happening and that's human caused. This is where you start to see a little bit of that separation. So people in Hennepin County say that their highest concern are for plants and animals. So a good place to kind of ground in what we're concerned about, but and future generations, but lowest concern is for them personally. So again, there's kind of a gap between thinking like, well, I'm concerned about climate change, but it's not going to impact me. There is high support for policies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and really high support for climate change to be taught in schools. According to this research, 75% of our residents say they value environmental protection over economic growth. This happened last year and, you know, the economy is constantly changing. So it'd be interesting to see if that has changed at all. And then Hennepin County residents want people to be doing more. They think individuals need to do more, but they also think local officials need to do more. So then when we dig into a little bit more about understanding audiences when it comes to climate change, you might have heard of the Yale, again, I'm going to reference them. They have a report they put out called their 6 Americas over the past few years. So that looks at 6 different groups of Americans. We looked at that and we looked at, I think, 5 more studies that kind of grouped people by different attitudes, values, concern, and engagement in climate issues. And we came up with 4 segments to think about. The percentages here are, you know, they're estimates, but I think they give you a good sense of how big these groups are. So as we go through these, and I'll go into a little bit more details in these, but kind of think about who do you talk to, who do you work with, who do you know, and maybe what, you know, can you hold in your mind some people that fit into these different groups? I always think that's helpful. So actively engaged champions and leaders, that's about 20% of your audience, and that I think has continued to grow over the years. There's also a group that's concerned, but just not very active. And that's a big group in the middle, about 30% of your audience. Your biggest group is the group that's just unsure, disengaged, and honestly difficult to reach. So that's our big challenge group, but they are the biggest opportunity, the biggest group. And then our actively opposed, that can be very vocal, but is the smallest group at just about 10% of the population. And one thing to know just in the US is that people differ more on values and especially political ideology and religious views and demographics. So you'll see political leanings come up in these segments, and that's because politics is really important when it comes to climate change in the US. All right, so digging into our actively engaged champions and leaders. So this group, again, about 20% of people, they have a high level of knowledge about climate change and feel a great sense of urgency to act. They are more likely to be women, middle-aged, upper income, highly educated, Democrats that live in urban and suburban areas. And they're likely to be taking action and want to do more. So this is your group that's already engaged, but we can focus on motivating them to take political action. And I'll talk a little bit more about why political action is really important. Encourage them to be leaders in their communities, provide them tools to do more, and provide them motivation, positive reinforcement, feedback. You're doing a great job. Your work is important. Helps to keep people motivated to keep going. All right, you're concerned but not very active group. So this is one of the big groups in the middle. They have some knowledge about climate change. They think the threat is serious, but again, they might be the group that thinks it's more distant. So they think it's going to impact future generations. It's going to impact wildlife or plants and animals far away, but not me personally. This group represents a broader diversity. They tend to be more moderate Democrats, and they're really focused on family and community. So that's an important part with this group, of really connecting with them through family and community values. They may be kind of planning to take action, but they may be overwhelmed and really unsure of where to start. So one thing I thought was interesting in this group is that a lot of outreach may kind of miss this group because it's either too simplistic or too advanced. So really kind of grounding in what this group cares about, again, family and community, finding out what they already know about climate change. So you're not being too simplistic there, but you're kind of filling in the gaps of their knowledge. Providing them that emotional inspiration, again, to care about future generations, and then provide them a roadmap for how to get started so that you can help them not feel as overwhelmed. All right, our biggest group are unsure, disengaged, and difficult to reach. This group's an interesting challenge. They only have some knowledge about climate change, don't think it's personally important or urgent. This group represents a broad diversity with a range of subgroups, and I'll talk about those a little bit, but they tend to be, politically divided between Republicans and Democrats, and many of them hold traditional religious beliefs. So some of the subgroups here would be people that live in more rural areas and really hold traditional religious beliefs, but there's also a segment of this group that are more urban, young, status seeking, kind of into pop culture. There's also more urban and diverse families that are maybe just kind of struggling to get by. The hard part about this group is they're not actively seeking out information about climate change or actively paying attention to it. So they're a harder group to kind of get their attention because they're just not engaged in finding out more. They might think that we're already doing enough on climate change. They might kind of support action, but think we're doing enough. And but the good opportunity with this group is they may easily change their minds. So if we're able to get their attention, they may change their minds. So thinking about channels that have broad mass appeal, messages with entertainment value, but then also positive social norms and peer-to-peer outreach. So getting peer groups to kind of do more on climate change to show these people that people like me care about climate change. And then small and measurable actions because they're not acting, and as a way to kind of get started. And then our last group, our smallest group, the actively opposed. So this group thinks they're well informed, certain that climate change isn't happening or human caused. They tend to be well-educated, conservative, higher income, white, male, with traditional religious beliefs, and a lot of them live in more rural areas. And they're concerned about the limits on economic growth and the impacts of climate policies. When we're doing outreach, this group is one just to decide if it's worth investing in it. Sometimes you might just be already dealing with people in this group, so it's good to know how. But, there's a lot of other people to be reached. The messaging that may resonate could include things around clean energy for self-sufficiency, and again, emphasizing that climate scientific consensus might be a good place to start. All right, so those are different audiences to think about it when it comes to climate change. So now we'll dig into barriers, motivations, and then behaviors to prioritize. So there's a lot of barriers to climate action. So this just kind of sums it up. Climate change is complex and overwhelming, and it's complex in the science. The science is a bit difficult to understand, and honestly, the models keep evolving and we keep learning more. I mean, it's the entire planet system, so it's very complex, but also the issues itself and the solutions are complex. The photo on the top here is from the Sunrise Movement, and they talk about jobs and justice and our survival, and there's just a lot of issues wrapped up in climate change, so it can be hard to kind of take that all in. I think it's important to recognize, and this is something that was kind of a turning point for me and for the county, is thinking about how misinformation and climate change has increased confusion and polarization, and that's something we have to acknowledge. I kind of alluded to this before, but talking about climate change is not a social norm, partially because we think other people don't talk about it, other people don't care, other people don't want to talk about it, but that tends to not be true. We underestimate how much others care. Climate change has also been couched as an environmental issue, which, we're from the Environment and Energy Department, so the county's also started there, but we're trying to make sure that it's very inclusive. And environmentalism has historically been perceived as elite, wealthy, and white, so it can, kind of turn some people off. And then just people have a lack of urgency and competing priorities. I use the example with the woman and the child and the masks, and we've had COVID and kids out of school, and people have a lot to deal with. So how do we make this a priority among all the other pressing issues that we have? Some key things that motivate people to care about climate change, using I mentioned social norms, but seeing helping people see how the issue fits with their identity and their values. Knowing that other people that are like them care about the issue makes it relevant and something they can see themselves being someone who cares about this issue. Evoking self-transcendent values, so talking about, we need to care for others, the community, the environment, the future, increases our intrinsic motivation to act. And I think that's an important point, because sometimes we think, we need to talk about saving money or, some just really selfish reasons, but people can be really motivated by these, kind of higher values. So I talked about positive or productive emotions earlier. So feeling a sense of worry has been found to be a productive emotion when it comes to climate change. We don't want people to feel fearful. So worry is a good one that balances concern with interest and hope, and it increases our urgency to act. So it's okay to feel worried about climate change. We don't want people to feel fearful, because that kind of causes them to shut down and disengage. And then focusing on building confidence and capacity. So helping people figure out what actions are effective, how to take those actions, and understanding how those actions have an impact are going to make it more likely that people will take action. All right, it's a good segment to talking about some key behaviors. So again, this is one that maybe doesn't seem that impactful, but just talking about climate change, starting to have some conversations is a good place to start. We talked about the importance of social norms. So this helps build that social norm that this is something we all care about, something we should talk about, something we want to work on. It helps overcome those false assumptions that others don't care. And there's ample opportunity to increase dialogue. So this is something I pulled from those Yale climate maps, but this is from Hennepin County last year. 56% of respondents in the county said they rarely or never talk about climate change. And about 70% of people say they hear about climate change in the news once a month or less. So there's a lot of room to just be talking more about these issues. We did send, and hopefully you got it. If not, Emily can share it too later, but I sent a summary of the project that I did, and there's a resource list at the end. This Talking Climate Handbook I found to be really interesting if you're looking at how to have conversations about climate change. I thought it was an interesting project because it was a global project where they asked people to have conversations about climate change and report back on how it went and what best practices there were. So it was kind of like a community science project. And some of the things they found is that it's good to find common interests and areas of concern. So really grounded in what are you both interested in? What do you both value? What are you concerned about? Talking about actions can be a good place to start. So we'll talk a little bit about the value of individual actions, but if you're saying, hey, like I've been biking for transportation and it's the best thing ever and I don't miss my car at all, like that can be a really good place to start that conversation. If you're saying, hey, I've been really focusing on cooking and reducing my food waste, and let me tell you all the things I've learned, that can just be a natural way to start those conversations. I've said this before, but emphasizing that scientific consensus that 97% of climate scientists agree that climate change is happening in human cause is a good place to start. And maintaining realistic expectations. So you're not going to change someone's whole mind. You're not going to change someone's whole world in one conversation. So think of it as, you're laying the groundwork, you're getting started. And if this was from the handbook, if the conversation goes really poorly, think of it as a lesson learned. What did you learn from that conversation that you can apply to future conversations? Okay, another key behavior is becoming politically and civically engaged. So we all know that our individual actions aren't going to be the change that we need on climate change. I see Joan asked the question, it's 97%. So yeah, we need kind of systems change, but how do we do that? So generally people support climate policies and they support climate education. And they would be willing to sign a petition or vote for a candidate that is a strong climate candidate. But there's a lot of barriers for people for taking political and civic action. So they might think others are doing it, or again, kind of the social norming thing. They might think that people like them aren't the type of people that take that action. And they might not understand what that means. They might, think they need to go to a protest or a demonstration, and maybe they're not the type of people that feel like they would do that, but there's a lot of other ways to become politically and civically involved. So helping people kind of see, and on different levels, right? You could talk to your national representative, you could go to a city council meeting. Like there's a lot of different ways that you can have that impact or get involved in a community organization. So some ways to kind of help people take this action. Back to social norming. Kind of amplify the social norm of taking political action, framing climate campaigning as part of a new reality. You don't need to be an environmentalist or an activist. There's a lot of things that you can do. And we all need to do this because we need to say that, we need to demand the change that needs to happen. And getting a variety of people to talk to that and encourage people they know to get involved. So again, kind of that peer-to-peer outreach. This photo here was from a campaign that Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light did, one of our community partners. But I just liked it because they had the sign says, I want 100% clean energy future in Minnesota. And then people listed the reason why. But I just enjoyed the diversity of people that this shows. And it's showing, they're advocating for this change and there's a broad diversity of people that are doing that. All right, and then focusing on the highest impact individual actions. I know we really debate, we need broader systemic change. What's the value in individual actions? But I think individual actions kind of cut two ways. If enough people are taking that action, it is going to pressure government and businesses to make changes. But also it gets people engaged. It makes people more likely they'll advocate for larger changes. It gives them a place to start conversation. It gives them an in to caring about the issue. One thing that can be really effective with individual actions is encouraging people to use their actions to communicate about what they're doing and advocate for larger change. And the other thing is to help people figure out what's going to have the greatest impact. What are, the actions that have a big impact? This was from our public engagement. There's this chart here is just from one study. You can find others on the internet that's kind of breaks down what are some of the highest impact individual actions. This list came out of our public engagement for the climate action plan. And we asked people a bunch of high impact climate actions. And we asked them, are you already doing this? Would you want to be doing this more? Are you not doing this, but you want to get started? Are you not doing this and you're not interested? And these are the actions we found that had the highest opportunity for increased engagement. So areas that the county is looking at, focusing on getting people more resources and more information. Reducing food waste is surprisingly high impact climate action. and a lot of food waste happens at home. How to support climate-friendly businesses in our community, how to practice more thoughtful consumption and buy better so we're having less of an impact with the stuff we have. Installing using solar energy or other renewable energy at home, cultivating a resilient urban garden, keeping water in your yard. So that's more of a climate resiliency and preparedness thing to reduce flash flooding. Talking with friends, families, and neighbors about climate change. So people are interested in doing this more. They need some tools. Upgrading to energy efficient appliances and using an electric or hybrid vehicle. And one thing I really like about this list too is that like, there's a wide variety here, right? So, I mean, when you're looking at ways to connect with people, when you're looking at things that people could focus on, there's a wide variety of things that we could be focusing on. All right, so I'm going to talk about some messaging that resonates and end with kind of a model for how we could think about how to figure out where to focus our climate actions. Take a water break real quick. All right. So when we're talking about what do we talk about with climate change? One thing I found really interesting is that like we haven't even completely decided on what we call the issue. And my point here is that we don't have to pick one term, and different terms might resonate with different people. So we've heard climate change a lot. That kind of gained popularity because people saw it as more scientifically accurate, but some people see it as polarizing or too gentle and passive because it's like, it's just happening. It doesn't assign, kind of guilt. There's been some studies that say global warming has more emotional engagement, but I tend to find that sounds a little outdated. There's some newer terms maybe you've heard: climate crisis, failure, shock, disruption, breakdown, emergency, so many ways. A lot of these terms really increase the urgency of the issue, and they kind of help create this tension that our goals and our values of where we want the future to go doesn't align with what we're currently doing. But some people might find those terms really kind of off-putting and polarizing. Damage to the climate implies something we've chosen and something we can choose to not do. And then the last term, environmental destruction. You don't see climate in there at all. That might resonate with more conservative audiences or audiences that might be immediately turned off by talking about climate change. So point here is not that we have to choose one, but just know that, I don't know, I thought it was interesting that we haven't even quite decided what we're even calling the issue. Explaining the science, that was one thing we grappled with of, do we need to spend time explaining the science of climate change? And we found yes, briefly, it's a good idea to make sure that we're all grounded in a common language about what causes climate change. This grounding it there is less likely to send people into their pre-existing opinions about what climate change is. It increases support for taking action, and it increases people's confidence in talking to others. I actually saw this really interesting at a Training One Time video where they asked people in the street, what causes climate change? And people were like, oh, I know. And then as they got into explaining it, they really tripped over their words and realized, I actually don't know how to explain this. So just handing people that way to talk about it can be really powerful. In the resource list that I included, there's a reference to a fact sheet by the Frameworks Institute, and they do a really good job of talking about using metaphors to explain the climate science. So one thing they recommend is the heat trapping blanket. So carbon dioxide acts like a blanket around the world, trapping heat. That they found to be an effective metaphor. And also talking about regular versus rampant CO2. Yes, there are regular levels of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, but what we're dealing with is an excess amount, and we need to get that under control to get our climate system back in order. The other thing that's important to do is make sure we explicitly connect climate to our lives. So explaining to people that climate is really the foundation of our lives. Everything we do to, where we live, what we can eat, all of that depends on a stable climate. So climate change is really that ground shifting under our feet. And we need to take action to get climate change back under control. Also making it really explicit, the energy climate connection. That can seem really obvious if we know a lot about climate change, but explaining to people that the fossil fuels that we're burning for energy is contributing to climate change, or that's what's causing climate change. And just some words that I found from research that were interesting, that talking about the energy we need to transition to is clean homegrown energy. So not so much renewable energy, but talking about wind, solar, other options. There's clean homegrown energy sources we can use. And then we need to move away from dirty, outdated fuels. So people don't necessarily know what fossil fuels are, but describing them as dirty and outdated fuels can be effective. All right, and then a few ways to frame the issue and how to decide what to talk about. So focusing on local impacts and local solutions. The photo I have here is from a program that was set up during the pandemic from Second Harvest Heartland to employ chefs that were out of work, feed the community, and reduce food waste. And so talking about really like all of these elements coming together, a really local solution that has a high impact. Evoking the need to prevent damage. So talk about the places that we care about and how we can prevent damage and save those places. And then speaking to tangible benefits. So a few examples here are these solutions could attract new businesses rather than improve the economy. New businesses a little more concrete. Or we can build strong communities rather than being resilient, because resilience is kind of a fuzzy idea. And I know I talk about being resilient a lot, so that's something I like, as I was going through this, I'm like, oh, I gotta listen to my own advice. I thought this was a really powerful way to think about it, but think about climate solutions as a future full of opportunity and innovation. So often we think about climate solutions as, sacrifice, but really they're the next big thing. And they really align with the American dream and will help us get there. Also that we can do this and that the solutions are here and available to us now. So we don't need to be waiting on new technology. We need to implement the solutions that we have, and that will drive us towards a better future, and it will help us invest in a better future. And thinking about, a lot of people are motivated by our responsibility for future generations. So talking about how the steps we're taking today are in the interest of those future generations, that we're facing a moment of choice to create a better future for them, but we need to act now. So we got to make sure we're not pushing off that action onto the future generations. We need to act now to protect their future. And then connecting to health. And this goes kind of to higher quality of life, personal health and well-being, and community health and well-being. So those connections to health really resonates with people. There's been a lot of good work done on climate change in the public health sphere from the Minnesota Department of Health. We have really strong community or partners in our public health department at Hennepin County. So the public health folks are, and individual health practitioners are really, strong partners in the climate movement. All right, just some wrap-up tips for delivering your message. So again, be realistic about the climate reality and impacts. Climate's here and it's impacting us now, and here's how. Here's how climate science works, really broad, high level, and how climate is really connected to our lives and impacts our lives. We often talk about telling stories when it comes to climate change and using narrative. And I like this tip about using both. So stories helps get us emotionally involved in the issue, but data and facts helps us kind of make decisions and decide where to focus. Use real images of people showing emotion and taking action. I know when we developed our climate action website and we had some users take a look at it before we launched, one of the biggest things they said is they loved all the imagery, and they loved that the imagery was local and they could see their community in it. So, thinking about how do we tell the climate story locally with visuals of people acting together, showing emotion. Find trusted messengers to deliver the message, and that's going to vary based on your audience. And I think the summary has a little bit more on that. But so people that people see as leaders and that they trust. Create a vision for a climate-friendly future that is hopeful, inspiring, and empowering. So really, share, here's what I think we can do by working on climate solutions. Talk about local solutions, innovation, and opportunity. So again, we have an opportunity to make a change. We have the solutions available to us. We can work together to do it. Connect to what your audience cares about. So spend some time getting to know your audience and figure out what they care about. And then provide tools and resources to get people involved, to get engaged, and to act collectively on solutions. All right. So now I'm going to talk about a framework for how we can figure out, because a lot of this comes down to, so what? So what can I do? I'm going to pause and see, are there any questions at the moment? I'm just going to scroll back up the chat to make sure I didn't miss anything. Wes says it feels like the divisions of the audience could easily apply to other heated issues. And I would agree. I think a lot of what you see, and when I've dug into how audiences are split up on environmental issues, on climate issues, yeah, you can kind of extrapolate that to say, the percentages might differ, the group size might differ, but it's probably true a lot. Diane recommended Catherine Hayhoe's book, Saving Us, A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World. And then let's see, my daughter's father-in-law is quite conservative in their politics and meets the actively opposed group. Let's see, 6 months ago, he asked me if I believed in climate change. I replied that it's not a religion, it's a scientific fact. He hasn't spoken to me since. Oh no. Any suggestions on how to break through this? Oh my. Well, I think one thing to think about too, though, is, and I guess I would be curious to know more about what your father-in-law kind of cares about. But just, I know you were saying like it's not a religion, something you choose to believe to, and believe it's a scientific fact. But there are a lot of very religious groups that are engaged in climate change. So if that's something that he values and is into, a lot of religious groups talk about creation care and our moral responsibility to care for the planet that we call home. So that could potentially be one place to ground it in. I also think maybe starting trying to restart the conversation, not on climate change. If there's a way that you could bridge that connection with something else that you care about, if that's family or community or something like that. And then if it circles back around to climate change, maybe with him, it's not necessarily talking about climate change, but things that are common values that taking climate solutions can get you towards. So if that's a healthier environment, that's clean water, if that's, so I mean, thinking about where are those commonalities where maybe you don't even have to talk about climate change, you can talk about what do we value that climate solutions help drive us towards. So it's a sticky situation. Hopefully maybe that helped a little bit. Any other questions at the moment?
Any questions?
All right, I'll have time for questions at the end too, but retired farmer, oh, Joan's adding some ideas too, so that's awesome, yes. All right, so when you're looking at, so what can I do? This was a model I actually heard on a podcast that I listened to called How to Save a Planet. This person's no longer a host there, but I just really liked it as a way to think about how do you focus your climate actions without giving people a list of actions they can take. So she suggested a climate Venn diagram and thinking about the questions, what brings you joy? What are you interested in? What kind of energizes you and gets you excited? And I thought about this for myself because I think all of you could reflect and maybe add some of your own ideas either in the chat, or I know for the group in the room, you could kind of share that with people around you. But so I was thinking about what brings me joy is, I showed you that picture of biking. I used to be a bike commuter, and then the pandemic hit and we started working from home. But I really enjoy biking for transportation, which is a strong, climate solution. I also enjoy looking at, trying to live a lower waste lifestyle and supporting businesses that are evoking those values. So if I think about what brings me joy, that's what I would put in that bucket. And if you have things that come to mind about what you would put in that bucket, I would love if you would share them in the chat. So what brings you joy? Also looking at what are you good at? What are the skills that you bring? What are the resources or the network that you can bring to the table? And for me, I was thinking I'm good at communications. That's kind of why I'm in the work that I'm in. I'm also good at kind of activating groups into action and organizing them. So those are a few of the things I've gotten to apply to the climate work at the county, but things I could kind of apply no matter what group I was working in. And then the final question is, what's the work that needs to be doing? There's a lot of climate solutions out there. I showed you just that list of actions, you know, from our public engagement. There's so many actions that people can be taking. And so we probably can't work on all the solutions at once. So where do you want to focus your efforts? You know, is there a certain kind of thing in your community, a certain policy that you want to see passed? Or is there a community organization you want to get involved in? Or, you know, do you work with your church or your kids soccer team, or, you know, like something you're involved with and that you could make changes in there? So there's so many options. And so this is a good model for figuring out, how do I kind of, you know, where do I best focus my efforts? It's also important to know that, you know, we're not doing this alone. So what can we do together? What organizations are you involved with? Obviously, you are all here at a League of Women Voters meeting. So that's one organization that you're involved with. But are there other organizations, you know, that you're involved with that you would want to kind of move along with climate action? Are there certain systems you can influence? And also, who is your team? Who might be your other champions that, because, you know, if you're organizing this, you're going to be in that actively engaged champions and leaders group. And is there others, you know, that would want to be your champions along with you? And Emily linked a worksheet that explains this. So, you know, you could take the time to complete your own Venn diagram, do it along with others, you know, and figure out where best to focus your climate actions. All right. And then I did just want to share a few resources. So I know Emily linked it in the chat, but the Connecting Community and Climate Summary, especially at the end, there's a list of the key resources that went into the presentation. They have so much information. So if you're interested in learning more, most of them do a really good job of kind of serving it up in a pretty digestible way. I also mentioned the county's climate initiatives. We do have a website, hennepin.us/climate-action. And we are adding articles every month to 2 sections. So we have a section on what the county is doing. So that's really focusing on the work that we're doing and pushing forward. Feel free to check that out and hold the county accountable for the work that we have said we're going to do in the plan. The website also includes a background on the plan, some more information about climate change in Hennepin County. So if you're ever looking for kind of really local information about climate change, that's a good place to go. The Minnesota Department of Minnesota Department of Natural Resources also has a state climatology office. It's a great place to go. We do have a whole series on engaging the community and encouraging others. So we have tips for talking about climate change, an article on figuring out where to focus your climate action, some climate education resources, and in August, we'll be adding an article on explaining the science of climate change. And we do have a climate action updates newsletter. So we will share all of the new articles we've posted and other news about the county's climate initiatives in that newsletter that comes out every other month. All right, so that is the end. I know we were going to do some more discussions, but I think I'm just going to leave time for questions since we got started a little late. So how are we educating elected officials beyond the county commissioners? And our Green Notes newsletter. Yeah, we can find a link for that. So in the development of the climate action plan, I wasn't involved so much in this part, but they coordinated a group of, they call them public entity partners, because that included city officials, but also watershed districts, state agencies, so kind of local and state officials. And they got their feedback on how they want to collaborate on climate change, what their priorities are, and kind of what role they saw the county playing. And we got a lot of really good feedback from them in the development of the climate action plan. And then going forward, we're planning to use that momentum to continue to coordinate those groups, collaborate on some key issues, trying to think of a few of them, but energy efficient buildings and electrification, electric vehicle infrastructure, stormwater management were all kind of key issues that they wanted to collaborate on. And so that's kind of with the public or the elected officials and those partners. And then the county is currently hiring 2 community engagement liaisons. So they're going to work more directly with community groups and the public on continued engagement. So hopefully that answers your question. I think in the next newsletter, we might have an update on some of the work we're doing with like cities and other things. So any other questions? Oh, and Emily shared the Green Notes newsletter. So that I should explain. So we have the climate action updates. So that's specifically on the county's climate work. Like I mentioned, the climate work is very cross-cutting. So it'll include stuff from environment and energy, transportation, our facilities that manage all our buildings, public health. And then the Green Notes newsletter is comes directly out of the Environment and Energy Department. So that's going to include some stuff on climate, but also all the other environmental issues we work on. So waste, natural resources, you know, things in those realms. So other questions people have?
Okay. Yes?
This is not necessarily a question, but I'd like to say hello to Emily Johnson. She used to work with us at the Anoka County Soil and Water Conservation District.
Oh, she did.
Yes.
Is that
Emily's
Mary
right.
Jo?
So Glenda, Mary Jo, and Colleen
Oh.
are all here.
Hello. Good to hear your voice.
I can tell you at Hennepin County, we're very grateful that Emily is with us now because she's doing incredible work.
Can I join you up there?
Sure.
I think that for us at League, we need to figure out what we're going to do. We can do projects, and that's something that I think that the time is ready for us to stop learning about climate and start doing.
Exactly.
And there's things that we can pick up. We could try to work, for example, on food waste. Food waste composting in Anoka County is kind of pathetic and spotty. And so we could do a lot better with that. There's a lot of things that we could do that we can make a difference in, and maybe it's time to do that. Maybe we have an electric car show and invite people to bring their electric cars to a meeting so we all see that they're not weird things. You know, there's stuff to happen that needs to happen, and we can be the people that do some of that. So I know that Diane Kroll is on tonight. Diane and I chatted earlier today about the need to work on plastics. She wants to work on a full plastics ban in Minnesota, the end of manufactured plastics for things. And you have to think a lot about that and figure that out, but she's got energy around that. So there's things that we can pick up and do, and it's a good time for us to do that.
Yeah. And I got a little questioning today. I questioned Scott Schulte, who's Anoka County Chair, on what they are currently doing for climate crisis. He replied they are partnering with Connexus on the solar projects on county-owned land. They're converting all county-owned lighting to LED, and they're installing energy-efficient drive motors in all HVAC and elevators. The other thing that I did a little organizing today, I wanted to know which groups are working on climate issue that we could connect with. There are not very many at all in Anoka County. Glenda's got her hand up.
Well, at the Anoka County Conservation District, one of our staff members is working on the Anoka Sandplain Rare Plant Rescue Program, and she can use volunteers. And I've got information.
Okay, well, thank you. So that's a good thing. So I guess I don't know exactly where to pick this up. I've got my plate full, so other people are going to have to say, we will lead this and we will do this. But it's something we can do together. So
The feedback I've gotten from people from like Sue DeGance and Ellen Headley, I think we pretty much all know those ladies, they said they are overwhelmed too with election issues. And some of us at this personal meeting are too. I hate to put this off. I might, keyword here is might, be willing to lead an effort. And if anybody in the audience here is willing to join me, please raise your hand. Good. We got Colleen, Kathy. Good. I'll be contacting you, okay?
So Alyssa, you feel like we trapped you into this. So,
No, this is great.
Okay.
I just am so inspired. I'm
Okay,
like,
good.
this is your team.
Col-
Um,
Colleen wants to say something here.
What if we even think of something simple like planting a tree in your yard?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm ready to get some higher fruit than that.
yeah.
You know, we've been doing low-hanging fruit. I'm ready to step it up and do
Me
things
too.
that are larger scale.
What kind of example, like what do you want to do?
I thought food waste composting was a good one to work on. You know, food waste is what, 40% of the food of the trash?
It's huge.
Yeah,
You know, if we would talk to our neighbors
Yeah.
about the composting, and we have it just down the street for Anoka County composting, our backyard composting.
yeah. So the thing that I got with the county composting is that they're only open 4 hours a week in the winter's times. And so it gets,
In the winter, everything freezes.
well, yeah, then you have a whole garage full of frozen trash. So,
But you know, on personal levels, if we don't have to, in the summer, we don't have to keep our houses so cold.
yeah.
We can, and in the winter, we don't have to keep our houses so warm.
So
And
there's
this is
things like that
something
we can do too.
individually everybody can do.
I don't know if you guys are
Not use a
hearing.
plastic bag when you go to the grocery store.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people are sharing ideas here for personal things that we can do, and those are all good things. So I will, do you want to say the goodbyes?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I want to
wait a minute.
thank,
Why don't you come over here so you're on the camera? I don't know where the camera is.
This
Are you
is
on-
Joan. May I ask a quick question? Alicia, are there any more of those
know
green
where
grants
cameras-
happening in the Hennepin County? I know there's a green organization. Are you aware of any grants?
yeah, so in Hennepin County, we have a variety of, and I actually should find, we have a fact sheet on all of our grants. So we do have grants for environmental education. We have a lot of grants for recycling. Our grants for natural resources have been a little bit on hold the past year just to kind of evaluate them, but they will be coming back. So I guess I need to know a little more specifically what you're looking for, but we do have a variety of grants, and I have
The
fact
website probably will,
yeah, the fact sheet has, I just linked a PDF, and that just
okay,
lists all
that's
of the
fine.
grants that we have. Yeah.
Thank you, Alicia.
Wes, I've been trying to find, I'm not the mosquito expert, so I've been trying to find the answer to I couldn't find anything on the Mosquito Control District's website. But I was looking at the DNR to see if they have anything, but that's an interesting question. Yeah, and I guess a few things just based on your conversation, kind of my reaction is, I think you guys are on the right track of thinking about, you know, like what could we do? I think too, there's so much power in local, you know, in pressuring local officials. And, you know, I mean, from the county perspective, we can do it, but there's also like great power in community organizations like yourselves in figuring out what you kind of want to push the political system to do and how to help other people navigate that. I can kind of see you as a bridge. I know in Hennepin County, there's a few citizen climate lobbies. So if you're looking for like examples of what they're working on, that might be a group, you know, a few of those groups to kind of just look at what is kind of their platform or what are they working on as a model. So that might be a good thing to look into.
Can all of the links that are in the chat room be made available to us that are sitting in the room?
yes, we will make them available. And I would like to thank Alisa and Emily. You've given us an awful lot to think about. And I think we kind of agree it's time to start thinking about this for the league. We intend to do that. Thank you both.
Awesome. Thank you.